Imagine a scenario, a business, any business, and all of a sudden there's a mandatory minimum wage increase. Now, some people in this business make the minimum wage, they'll get a wage increase, maybe. Some people make a little bit above the minimum wage, some people are managers. But the reality is that the budget for salaries does not change. So now there's some shifting that needs to happen. Maybe some hours will change. Maybe some people will actually get a wage increase, but others will fully lose their jobs. So here's the thing. On the one hand, you have some percentage of a wage increase. On the other, you have a 100% decrease in wages, because that's what happens when you lose your job. This is the essence of the minimum wage debate, okay? And we're about to vote on this week in the U.S. House of Representatives. There's two big problems with the minimum wage increase to $15. One is the economics of it. I just gave you a little bit of a preview there. The second part is the fact that it is a one-size-fits-all policy from the federal level. That's problematic too. But let's talk about the economics for a second. Some cities have already tried this. Seattle, LA, San Francisco, and what we've seen is employment has actually decreased in those cities. Many studies back this up. The CBO just did a study on what would happen if we had a $15 minimum wage, and here's what they found. 3.7 million jobs potentially lost. That's right, 3.7 million. Real income would actually decrease by $39 billion. What does that mean and why? Well, it's because of purchasing power. Purchasing power would go down because the cost of a lot of goods, especially at places like restaurants and grocery stores where low-income people would need to shop, those costs would rise and therefore people's purchasing power would go down. $39 billion lost right there. The other thing you have to remember is that this isn't the best way to combat poverty, and here's why. We're actually focusing on the wrong things. 40% of people who work at a minimum wage are from a family or a household that has 3 times the poverty rate, meaning they're not in poverty at all. Also, 50% of people making the minimum wage are 25 and under. This should tell us something. It tells us that these are entry-level jobs, jobs for people who are working less hours, maybe just adding some income to their household. They are not the breadwinners of their family. It's also important to recognize that these jobs are for the people trying to grab that first rung on the ladder. That's important. It's your first job, and you need to have access to that first job. A minimum wage that is too high, it prices people out of that market, and that's not a good thing. The second problem with a federal minimum wage is the fact that it's federal. It's a one-size-fits-all policy. We're pretending that we can set the perfect price for an entire country. Well, that's problematic because the reality is that municipalities and counties and states across the nation are very different. They have different costs of living. For instance, San Francisco has a $4,500 average rent. Wow, that's high. Lubbock, Texas has a $699 average rent. Very different costs of living. Very different wages for those places. And by the way, municipalities, cities, counties, they're perfectly capable of setting their own minimum wage. Those are the problems with the minimum wage. They cost jobs. It doesn't make sense in a one-size-fits-all policy, and it's bad for the people we're trying to help the most.